Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I see that a few people the numbers are still increasing, so we still have a few people coming in. But thanks to those of you who are here with us on time. We do have a fairly packed schedule today, so I think I'm going to get us started on time so that we can get through all the content. But we will be making sure that you have all the resources, so if you miss anything, please let us know. First of all, I really want to thank Euronext for hosting us today. This training workshop on gender equality is really a collaborative effort. So it's developed with a bunch of partners, including the IFC, UN Women, and Columbia University, with support from the Luxembourg government. And then it's brought to you. It's only made possible thanks to our hosts. And Euronext is hosting us today. And we've been working a long time with Euronext. So it's really great to finally bring this initiative to both your staff and the market. And I'm so pleased that we have with us today a representative from Euronext. Sylvia Anderson is General Counsel at Euronext, as many of you might know, but she's also in charge of coordinating ESG, environmental social governance, at the group level. So Sylvia, thanks so much for taking time. I know you're on the road right now, so thanks for joining us to kick off this workshop. I'm going to pass to you for opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Tiffany, and I hope you hear me all well. Great, very good. So thanks a lot and welcome everyone to this very important training. I'm very excited to discuss Euronext's very special role in promoting gender equality. I mean, many of you know that Euronext has been at the forefront of promoting ESG transparency amongst listed companies. For example, through My ESG Profile, that we launched recently, we provide easy access to company ESG profiles. And these are crucial for understanding the progress and also the challenges in achieving gender diversity in corporate leadership. The representation of women in leadership roles has become a key indicator of a company's social performance and also to the commitment of diversity and inclusion. And recent data from our ESG profile shows a steady increase in women holding board and executive positions. In the last 3 years, large caps have reported an average of 42.6 women on their board. Mid caps are slightly lower with 38.6, and small caps have an average of 28.9 women in their boards. This trend is also reflected in management bodies, with women now making up 27.3%, which is a 4% point increase since 2020. It's not dramatically a big increase, but I think it's important that the trend is positive. Moreover, since 2020, the percentage of issuers disclosing gender diversity has significantly improved, with a nearly 38.5% increase in women in the workforce, and that's primarily driven by the small and the mid caps. In 2023, 92% of nearly 1,900 companies listed on Euronext disclosed data on board gender diversity. So that's very, very important. This transparency empowers investors to make informed decisions favoring companies that prioritize gender diversity and inclusion. And it also raises awareness and motivates companies to enhance their gender equality practices. This week, we released the ESG Trends Report 2024, offering valuable insights into the progress of ESG initiatives, including gender equality amongst Euronext listed companies. You can find this report on the Euronext website. This is not the only way we can promote gender equality. As a market infrastructure, Euronext plays a crucial role in directing investments towards, in general, ESG projects and including those leading in gender equality. For example, in 2022, we launched 2 gender equality indices. The Euronext Equileap Gender Equality Eurozone 100, a very long name, and another long name, the Euronext Equileap Gender Equality France 40. These indices provide exposure to companies with strong gender equality performance. And the French index is the first national gender index, highlighting Euronext's leadership in this area. In this training, you will hear more about how these indices work and the impacts they have. Euronext's commitment to gender equality is also reflected in our educational initiatives. We offer specialized training sessions like this one to equip companies with the knowledge and tools necessary to advance gender equality within their organizations. In addition to training, Euronext actively participates in global initiatives such as International Women's Day, and each of our marketplaces engage in the Ring the Bell for Gender Equality campaign. And this is a global initiative where stock exchanges host bell ceremonies to commemorate International Women's Day and to promote the women's empowerment principles. We also host various events, panels, speeches, lunches, and networking sessions in partnership with organizations like Women in Finance, Women in ETFs, UN Global Compact, and UN Women NL. So we can say we have made progress. But despite the progress made, the journey towards gender parity in the corporate world is far from complete. Challenges such as unequal pay, underrepresentation in leadership roles, and gender bias in recruitment and promotion practices continue to impede progress. Education remains one of the most powerful tools for driving change, which is why we are proud to host this training program with the Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative. Thank you so much for taking the time to being here, and let's continue working towards a gender equal workplace. So here I'd like to give the floor back to Tiffany, and I wish you all a wonderful training.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Sylvia, and really bravo for all the hard work that Euronext has been doing. I think we'll see later that the progress is being seen in the market. So really great leadership we're seeing in Europe, and hopefully we can continue to expand that with all of our companies in the supply chain too. Thanks, Sylvia. You also mentioned the Ring the Bell for Gender Equality, and one of our partners in that, along with every other thing we're doing right now on gender equality, is the IFC, part of the World Bank Group. So pleased to have with us today Sarah Kuderi, who is Corporate Governance Officer at the IFC and works with us on a number of these projects. Sarah, I'd love to come to you just for a couple opening remarks as well before we dive into the content.
Thank you, Tiffany, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to join you, first of all, in thanking Euronext and Sylvia for hosting us this afternoon. Well, this afternoon for you. I'm based in DC, so it's still morning for me. It's as you said, we have a long-standing partnership on gender equality with UNSSE, and we're very grateful for that. We're also partners beyond gender equality, notably in the space on sustainability and climate disclosure. And I believe, and this is because we believe that change happens through the capital markets. It's a potent lever to reach out not only to issuers, but also set things in motion and have a demonstration effect across all markets. And this is why this partnership with UNSC is so instrumental. Our work at IFC, so IFC is an international finance institution. So our target markets are emerging markets and development economies. But having the chance to partner like this in more sophisticated market is also key to demonstrate to the rest of the world what is being done elsewhere. At IFC, advancing gender equality has been central to our development mandate. We are proud of this partnership, but we're also proud of why we do it. And we do it because, of course, it's the right thing to do, but also because we believe in the business case. I know that most of us who are around this table, around this virtual room today, believe in the business case, but I just wanted to point out at a recent study that we did. We started in gender equality a few years ago, and the first study that we did was to demonstrate the correlation between improved ESG performance and gender equality. And there we found a positive correlation. Recently, we also released a study on illustrating the nexus between more women on boards and more women in corporate leadership and climate governance. And this came back also with positive correlations, as well as a set of recommended action. Broadly speaking, research does show that among 2,000 listed companies, that when there's as small as 1% increase in female managers, this can be correlated to a 0.5 decrease in carbon emissions. I would also like to say that as we roll out this program with UNSSE for capital markets, we're also working in depth in different countries of the region to build the capacity of women corporate leaders, be it senior management or board directors, to navigate aspects specific to the bias they might face in their organization. We've rolled out such a project in the Europe and Central Asia region, and we're now extending it to various regions. We're also working closely in markets like Kenya and Tanzania, and soon to be in Latin America to extend our footprint. Finally, we'll finish with a little bit of what we do at IFC as to our own internal organization. We do want to walk the talk. So right now, I just received yesterday a survey from EDGE. We are going through the EDGE gender recertification process. And we've also looked closely at gender diversity in the board directors that we appoint as nominee board directors when we take equity investment. About some 5 years ago, the picture did not look, it looked okay, but it didn't look super great because we were at 20% of all of our nominee board directors identifying as female. And we're now standing, I'm very proud of this because it's required some very targeted search efforts. We're now standing at over 50% of female board directors. Now, as we proceed with these 2 modules, the event is structured over 2 days, and we really want to focus for this first day on the why, not because we know that most of you already have a level of awareness, but it's also important for you to become champions within your organizations and within your market, and provide you with the tools needed to explain to others why is it important, and secondly, what exactly. Gender equality can take many forms, and we want for you to leave for today with some idea of concrete tools, concrete actions that can equip you as well as other leaders on becoming advocates. The second session will go through the how and the where, but I'll leave that for the second day. I'll also want to say that I will be here throughout the training, mostly as a fly on the wall, but very happy to answer any question as to IFC. And I might put a few links in the chat, Tiffany, about, for example, the recent research we did on the nexus between females in leadership and climate governance. I do wish you a successful workshop, and I hope that you find it interesting and above all practical, and that you can go back to your companies and your organizations and spread the good word. Thank you very much, Tiffany. Let me hand it over back to you.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks for sticking around. Just to note to everyone, if you do have any questions throughout this training, we have a number of experts here to answer from various perspectives. Sarah particularly adds the investor perspective here today as well. So let's dive in. We have a lot of content to get through today, and I don't want to have to skip any, so I want to get right into it. Now, as you know, we're here to talk about gender equality and global markets. And in this first part, as Sarah mentioned, we're really talking about understanding what that is, the why. Now, as we understand, a lot of you are in markets that are very advanced, but you work with other organizations and you still have to champion this topic. So we want to make sure we're equipping you with that understanding. Now, to do that, we have 2 hours together today, and then next week we have another 2 hours. Throughout the whole time, you can use the live Q&A box. So I'll show you what that looks like in a second, but make use of that Zoom function in order to ask us any questions. You can also ask anonymously if you're not comfortable committing that with your name. We do expect you to participate. This is an interactive workshop. We do talk a lot because there's a lot of content to get through in 2 hours, but we're going to use different tools like Mentimeter and Zoom polls and that Q&A or the chat box in order to have conversations with you. So please don't be shy. If there's anything you want to discuss, do bring it up to our attention. And then to reward you for that participation, we will provide a certificate at the end of the second session. So if you join us next week, we'll let you know how to get that certificate, which is CPD certified as well. So as you can see here, the Q&A box looks like that, the 2 little bubbles there. So any question you put in there, we'll make sure to do our best to answer and to find the best answers we can for you there. I do have my colleague Lisa from the UN SSE initiative. She's deputy coordinator. She's here helping us out with that Q&A. And I also have the rest of our facilitators with us today. So we'll make sure to get to those questions. Now, to quickly introduce you to who we are, my name is Tiffany Grabsky. I'm the SSE Academy head, and I'm joined today with my colleague Landon Wilcock, who is project officer. Together, we're going to be facilitating a lot of the training today and answering all of your questions. Very pleased also to be joined today with Anna Falth, who is the head of the Women's Empowerment Principles Secretariat. And Anna has more than 20 years experience as an economic advisor within the UN system, but also in other areas, and provides a lot of advice on gender equality, now having worked even with the WEPs for quite a while. So thanks so much, Anna, for joining us, and we look forward to having your expertise in this session as well, too. And we have a guest speaker today. As we were introduced by Sylvia to the Equileap indices, we do have Equileap here with us today, and Heather Larson is Director of Equality Research. So she's going to share with us a bit about what Equileap does and how it's been integrated into the indices at Bloomberg, or sorry, at Bloomberg, at Euronext. And we're going to be talking more about that next time as well with some of your colleagues at Euronext. Thanks, Heather, for joining us, and we'll speak to her at the end of the session today. Great. So as mentioned, today we're really looking at addressing these complexities in gender equality. And to do that, we've broken down our full training into 4 modules. The first 2 we'll cover in our first session today. So the Prepare and Align unit. In Prepare, what we're really looking at doing is building kind of a solid foundation of understanding. So here we're talking about the general landscape of what's happening, the language that's being used, and that big why, the purpose for even discussing gender equality in corporations. And then on the alignment unit, we're really looking at how do you, once you understand why and the objective of where you want to get to, what do you use as guidelines, and how do you make sure you've got, the railroad tracks setting you in the right direction and making sure that you're staying in that right direction. So we'll discuss there this at a global level, a local level, and a peer practice level. And then next time when we get together next week, we'll look at those next 2 units, which are looking more at implementation and communication. So today we do have a couple learning objectives. Our first learning objective today is to help you to understand why action is needed for enhanced gender equality. And then our second learning objective today is to help you to identify what tools can be used to enhance gender equality in corporations. And to do that, here's a quick look at our brief agenda here. Just to note, we're going to do step 1, prepare, in the first half of today's session, and we're going to have a very short 5-minute stretch break halfway through. And then we'll come back for part 2 and Align, where we're looking at those gender lens frameworks and those guidance documents that you can use as you move forward. At the very end, we'll have a quick wrap up, and then we'll ask you to come back next week for the continuation of this training. Now, as I said, we are going to be interacting in a few different ways, and one of them is using Mentimeter. So I'm going to ask my colleagues, either Lisa or Landon, to share in the chat. Oops, I need to present this. There we go. How to access this Mentimeter, but I'll also put up this QR code, which makes it sometimes a little bit easier. So you can either use the link that my colleagues are sharing in the chat for you, or you can use your phone. Hopefully you're joining with a computer and you can just point your phone at that QR code. Or you can just type into a browser www.menti.com and type in this code that you see at the top of your screen, 4107-2722. And let us know how comfortable you currently are with these specific topics. So how comfortable are you, or how confident are you in your knowledge of gender equality and global markets? How about with discussing this topic with others, having a conversation with your colleagues perhaps on gender equality? And then finally, about taking action to improve gender equality in your organization. So not just talking about it, but actually taking some action. Now, it's good to see we have some experts here, at least on discussing the topic. Interestingly, we have more people who are confident that they can discuss this and take action on it than they are about their own knowledge about this topic, which is something we haven't seen before. But hopefully we'll move all of you over that way as we move forward. I see that we have already at least half of you that have filled that in. So I'm going to share my other screen again, and we'll go back to the slides and dive into that topic. All right. Great. So that brings us to Unit 1. Now, in this first unit, we're really trying to, as we're discussing, kind of get everyone on the same level and the same understanding of why we're working on this particular topic. Now, we have 3 units in this topic, or in this module. One looking at the purpose, the why, another looking at the landscape where we're at so far, the progress that's been made, and maybe more we need to make. And finally, also the language. So the first one we're going to look at here is on the case, the why we're working on this. And I think it would be miss of us to start in the why without at least mentioning, of course, human rights. So I think we need to all remind ourselves as we talk about gender equality that equality is actually a human right. It is widely documented that women and girls actually experience adverse impacts of business activities differently and often disproportionately to men and boys. And they also face additional barriers in seeking access to effective remedies. So moreover, because of multiple forms of discrimination, different women and girls may be affected differently by business activities depending on their age, their color, their caste, their class, ethnicity, religion, language, literacy. I could go on and on. So the document that you can see on your screen here is the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which are the global authoritative standards to prevent, mitigate, and remediate business-related adverse human rights impacts. And we flagged this here because we wanted to point a few kind of principles that everyone should really make sure they're quite well aware of. The first principle here is number 14, which indicates that the responsibility of business enterprises is to respect human rights, and that applies to all enterprises, regardless of their size, their sector, operational context, ownership, or structure, so listed or not. The second principle we wanted to highlight here is number 16, which encourages businesses to express their commitment to meet their human rights responsibility through a statement of policy that should have certain characteristics. You can read more about those characteristics in this document, but just to take a note that not only should, of course, your organization have that document already laid out, a policy set up, but the companies you work with, you might want to also inquire as to whether they have such a principle. Another principle of this document we flag is number 20, which highlights that in order to verify whether adverse human rights impacts are being addressed, businesses need to track the effectiveness of their response by using sex disaggregated data collected in line with a human rights-based approach and outcome indicators developed in consultation with the affected people and gender experts. So we'll be discussing this in much more detail in part 2, as well as later today when we're talking about data. But it's really important to note that building off that policy that's being set, you have to also be measuring it and making sure that you're heading in the right direction. And then finally, Principle 21 particularly highlights the important role of communication. So according to this principle, businesses should be prepared to communicate externally, particularly when concerns are raised by or on behalf of affected stakeholders. And business enterprises should communicate adequately and easily accessible information to the affected stakeholders regularly, especially in today's day where we're seeing a lot of greenwashing, pinkwashing, whitewashing, and regulatory issues that are leading to also stakeholder engagement working a little bit differently. So keeping in mind that communication aspect. Now, it's also important to note that the sustainable development globally depends on equality of genders. So you may recognize this image here. It's from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. And gender equality is on its own one of the 17 SDGs agreed to by UN member states. It's number 5. But it also contributes to all other SDGs. So the SDGs represent a really ambitious attempt to end poverty, to protect the planet, and to improve the lives and well-being of all of humanity. And SDG 5 focuses specifically on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. But aspects of gender equality appear in the targets and associated indicators of 10 more of the 17 SDGs. And if you'd like to see how gender equality links the different SDGs, you can have a look also at Annex 3 of the SSE's guidance on gender equality for stock exchanges. And maybe I'll ask one of my colleagues if they could share that in the chat so everybody has a quick access to that. Now, so we know that we need gender equality for human rights. We know that we need gender equality to achieve sustainability goals. What else does gender equality do for us? So by increasing gender equality, there's actually a number of things that we can see and that have been well documented in society. Studies have shown that the more equality of genders that we have in society, we also see then lower levels of violence, we see greater economic productivity, and we see increased resilience against financial and environmental crises. So a lot more stability actually is what we're seeing. Now, I do want to remind you here that we're talking about gender equality. So we're not just saying we have to increase women. However, in many societies, that's still what we're working towards, is increasing the equality for women. And as I talked about before, in many cases, women actually are facing bigger barriers than men, but we can't assume that we're always talking about women. We have to make sure that we're doing the analysis and understanding which gender might need greater support. I'm going to switch to our next slide here to talk a little bit more about those benefits. So promoting gender equality of both genders has been found to have positive social impacts, positive environmental impacts, as Sarah was discussing earlier, and also positive economic and business benefits. And if we narrow a bit deeper into the benefits that companies in particular can find from enhancing equality in their organization, we see from various studies that, for example, companies with higher levels of diversity, both gender and ethnic diversity at the executive level, are found to have higher performance than their less diverse counterparts on both profitability and long-term value creation measures. We also see that different genders have different attitudes towards risk. So if our decision makers, the board, for example, or the leadership team, are gender diverse across the organization and programs, this can lead to a more balanced decision-making process. We also see that different genders experience the world differently and therefore have different views and ideas, and that can bring us more innovation and can help companies be more competitive. Other examples include that companies with workplace policies that support and promote gender equality are then better able to attract and retain talent. Also, we see that gender lens investing mandated investments globally are continuing to increase. We'll talk about that a little bit more next time, but we've seen an increase from 100 million to 2.4 billion in gender lens investing from just 2014 to 2018. One other point there is that companies with more diverse boards and senior management teams are found to demonstrate better environmental, social, and governance, or ESG performance, including having more ethical business practices, enhanced workplace and workforce policies, and stronger community relations. And just to remind you, what we're talking about here is equality, not just adding more women and expecting women to have all the answers, but rather it's more of the equality and working together. And what that brings is that openness of an equal working environment. So I'm not going to go too far into detail in these two studies here. These next two slides are all from the same study, actually. But we did want to see kind of what that means in numbers. We talk a lot about qualitative descriptions and what benefits we might see. But let's look at what some studies have found in numbers and see what they've actually seen. So this is from FP Analytics, which is the Independent Research and Advisory Division of Foreign Policy. And this study looked particularly at industries that are traditionally male dominated. So those that anyways, we tend to see mostly men in the industry. And this analyzed 2,300 publicly listed companies that were male dominant around the world. And they used in-depth one-on-one interviews and follow-up surveys to those interviews to get this information. And then the study finds that companies with more women on their board of these male dominant industries on average have higher profit, they have greater transparency, and they have higher social rating. So let's take a quick look at those three. So first, in terms of profitability, so this study found that the companies with the highest percentage of women in management on average were 47% more profitable than those with the lowest percentage of women in their management. These findings are consistent with some others, but I mean, it does depend on the study that promoting gender equality or gender diversity can benefit businesses' bottom line. We also know another study by the ILO, the International Labor Organization, where women were interviewed for the study, and they detailed how they are leading their organizations on new revenue generating paths and advancing innovation in inertia-prone industries. So I think what's interesting about this study is it's really looking at industries where they tend to have mostly men, and they're bringing in new perspectives and bringing in women who probably haven't been in that industry very long, maybe came from the outside and are joining. We also saw then transparency. So on the bottom of that slide there, bottom left, you can see in transparency. So transparency links a lot to building trust, and building trust across stakeholder groups, including employees and consumers and regulators and investors, is really vital, especially for these legacy industries that are working to evolve their business models and improve regulatory compliance and performance and respond to consumers' changing needs. So this study found that companies with the highest percentage of women on boards are more transparent by 32% compared to the other side, those that have less women on boards. They also found that companies with at least one woman on the board are 17% more transparent than those with no women on their board whatsoever. So even just that first step was making a huge difference in transparency. And then the final graph we can see on this one here is on CSR, corporate social responsibility. And this study found a positive correlation also between gender diversity on corporate boards and company social responsibility performance. And I'm going to take just a moment to look at this one too, because then we see kind of how it goes beyond just within the company and externally. So just a few more graphs you can look at here. I do recommend, if you want to go into detail, you can look at this study on your own time. But as you can see here, that we also saw when there's more women in these male-dominated industries, we're seeing the likelihood of improving their GHG emissions intensity increased significantly by 39%. We also saw that the likelihood of improving their water intensity usage increased even more by 46%. And then an even greater percentage, a 60% increase of likelihood of improving energy intensity. So all three of these are looking at how they interact with the outside world and how they're using energy and resources to improve their environmental footprint. And we see that by including more women in these male-dominated industries, so having a different opinion, outside views, maybe different experience and lived experience in the world, had a really great impact on that company. Great. So that brings us to the second unit of this module. I've been rushing quickly to catch us up to the timing we normally like to get to, and I'm happy to say we're right on time now. So I think I can speak a little bit slower now as we move on. Now, the second unit we're looking at here is where we're at so far. So we did hear from Sylvia already at the beginning about more or less how Euronext is doing and the improvement they've seen there. But I want to hear from a little bit from you guys, and I'm going to come back to this Mentimeter here. So you can go back to the same screen you were on before. So if you already had Mentimeter on your phone, just go back to that same window that you had open. And now that I've changed the slide, you'll see a new question pop up. If you closed it out already, no problem. Use that QR code there, or one of my colleagues will put in the chat box the link, and you can put that there again. We'll let all of you take a moment to give your guess on our current trajectory and how many years do you think the world globally will achieve gender equality. And now I think our options here were from 10 years. Do you think it'll be 10 years? Or do you think it'll be 500 years or somewhere in between? And I'll give you just a second to fill that in. I see the chat's been going quite a bit. So if anyone does have a question, Lisa, that you think I should address, just let me know. I haven't managed to follow all of it. Great. So I see a lot of you have already answered. So I think I can push enter and oh, there we go. So it looks like a lot of you were optimistic. So it really does depend on what studies we're looking at, because this does vary from the way we're studying this and whether we're looking at gender equality only in corporations or whether we're looking at it from a societal perspective, a legal perspective, a regulatory perspective. But what we used here was a report by UN Women, which we should be able to share in the chat box. Maybe Lisa Landon, if you can't find the UN Women report, let me know and I'll find it in the break. But this report found that it will be nearly 300 years. So 200, it's actually 286, but we had to pick it on the 5. So of 285, 286 years before we manage to achieve gender equality. Another example we might take is the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Report, which gave, like some of you, a bit more of an optimistic view, and they said it would be 130 years to achieve equality based on their calculations. But I think this year they actually moved it up a bit, so we're going backwards. I'd have to double check that though. So yeah, we've got a little ways to go. We want to see now where you think you're at. Now, you're all coming from different countries. So maybe you can pick whatever country you're in, or you can think regionally in Europe. But what percentage of CEOs of listed companies do you think are women? And we asked this question because you might be familiar with the American study that became quite viral, indicating that fewer large companies, this was in the US, are run by women than by men specifically named John. So I'm sure that's an indicator of where we've been at recently, but this does vary from one location to the next, and Europe is obviously different from other parts in the world. So have a moment and start to think, what percentage of the CEOs of a listed company do you think are women? And let's see where we think. The problem is I'm going to say that's probably about 50. So the majority of you say maybe 25% around that. Here we say maybe that's about 10%. The majority of you are saying 10 of you say about 10%. Okay, we'll keep those numbers in mind. So in the first 25% at least, everyone is. Okay. That 0 wasn't correct, just so you know. That was, I think, just something Zoom does. Okay, now think about board seats. So first we were talking about CEOs. Now think about board seats. How many board members do you think are women? So percentage of total board seats. Someone looks like they're saying 50%. So someone's saying, okay, we're doing much better on board seats than we are on CEOs. Majority of you are still in that first, at least the first 50%. One person looks like they've gone past 50% now. The biggest number here looks to be, I would say 30%, 25, 30%. And there's some, very pessimistic answers there, maybe 2%, a couple of you said. Good. Great, so I think I'm gonna stop there and let's go back to the presentation. Okay, great. Okay. So in order to discuss those numbers, let's look at the data. And for those of you who haven't seen these publications before, that's perfectly okay. But the SSE does, in collaboration with the IFC and UN Women, as well as some other partners, they work together to provide markets with an overview or a benchmark of current progress on gender in leadership of listed companies. So let's dive into one of these reports. You can find all of them on our website under the publications page. Let's dive into this one, which is from 2023. We're not quite done our 2024 ones yet, but let's look at the 2023 one, which looks at both the G20 as well as regional groupings. So on your screen now, you can see the first section of the report, which covers the G20. And we will also share the link to this publication in the chat. You can check out all of our publications if you wish, if you want to see the data. And we also keep a database on our website if you want to just dive into the data itself. But this data can really serve as a benchmark for not only stock exchanges, but also other relevant institutions and listed companies on their efforts to promote women's full and effective participation in and equal opportunities for corporate leadership positions. So let's zoom in a little bit more in that first table. And here you can see kind of the data that we provide here, which shows the average percent of boardroom seats held by women in the G20, which is about 22% on average in the G20 holistically. But as you can see here, Euronext Paris is doing particularly well for percentage of board seats. If you can't see, the top 5 stock exchanges or markets in the G20 are France, the UK, Italy, Australia, and the United States. And you can see that European countries are spotted a little bit throughout there, but France is leading and has been leading for quite some time now. So those of you who said 50% or around there, if you're located in France, then yes, you were right. And you weren't just being optimistic, you were being realistic. But for some other countries, as you can see at the bottom of the G20, we're seeing something very different. It's also, I think, worth noting that France, as the leader here in the G20 for women on boards, also requires 40% of boards to be women. However, even though the percentage of women on boards is among the highest in the world, as a result of that regulation, France's female executive leadership pipeline is not as strong. So you can also see there the percentage of CEO positions held by women is the second to last column. And for France, it's 6%. So it was fairly low. Some of you were guessing quite a bit higher than that. You might be located elsewhere, but the highest we see here, even in the G20, is the United States, actually at 13%. And remember that statistic I was talking about before, that there's more men named John than there are women in CEO positions. But the good thing is, France has recognized this, and in May 2021, the French Parliament actually voted to introduce gender quotas for executive leadership, and now 30% minimum of either gender is required by 2027, and then 40% by 2030, and that's in executive leadership positions, not just boards, as was already required. And we're seeing many countries improve, so you can see that. Well, it's maybe not easy to tell, but some of these, in the second column, we can see some red and some green. So that indicates if things are going up or they're going down. So the majority are going up, but as you can see, some are decreasing, actually, some are going backwards. Now, of course, boards change, CEOs change. We're going to have a bit of a fluctuation. But generally, we want to see an upward trajectory towards equality. And when we reach those levels of 45%, 50%, anything above 30%, then the fluctuation will naturally happen, but that's okay. We just want to keep it within that level. Now, quickly, let's look at the regional overview as well. So as you can see here, Europe is well advanced, especially in terms of board seats held by women. So 36% we can see there in Europe. Now that includes the top markets by market capitalization in Europe. So France, UK, Sweden, Germany, and Switzerland. We also can see though that when we come over to female CEOs, they're not the highest. So we still have some work to do in that front. There's 6% female CEOs in Europe, whereas, for example, we have 7% in Africa even. And we break down all of these in the report so you can see kind of where it goes per kind of per country. But just to note that there's only 2 regions that have an average over 30%. So Europe and the US, Canada, New Zealand, that second grouping there. This is, I think, significant to note where we're passing that 30% line, because it's been very highly researched that at least 30% representation is required for a fair power distribution and for less represented groups to be heard. We'll discuss a little bit later what we mean by being heard and representation, but keep in mind that 30% number is quite important. Also, we see, of course, Europe leading, and that's led by France. We also then see second is the US, Canada, New Zealand grouping is runner-up. We can see that the Africa region, which includes Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which really boosts up the rest of them, is third place. Now, Johannesburg Stock Exchange, 32% of women hold, or board seats are held by women. Whereas in that same grouping, EGX, the Egyptian exchange, has just 12%. So we can have a lot of disparity within one of these groupings. And in the very last place are Latin America with 12% and Western Asia with 7%. Now, if we break down the European data, we should be able to. Great. We can see those 5 countries kind of broken down a little bit more. I think this is all very self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go into it in great detail. But what I want to start thinking about here and encourage you all to start thinking about is what might be preventing certain areas from progressing beyond that 30%. And why are we seeing, fewer women leaders, fewer women CEOs? So take a minute to think about that and type in the chat. Or you can put it in the Q&A if you want to do it anonymously, that's fine too. Let us know, what do you think are the barriers to achieving gender equality in the corporate room? And I will give you just a moment to think about that and share your thoughts. First one I see, thanks, Margaret, is willingness to choose a female leader. That's a great answer. It's important to start thinking about these things, because even if your company is doing a really great job, which we are seeing a lot of companies doing in Europe, what will you do when you start working with a new company in your value chain and they aren't doing such a great job? What are the reasons that you want to try to overcome? We see Amber says CEO stereotypical traits that women do not represent, or the bias related to that. Great. Or gender stereotypes and bias. Hannah agrees, similar thing. We also see a lack of confidence of female role models, certainly. Yeah, I think that Carlos comes back to those biases about the other person is better prepared, or a lot of those biases that we seem to think are related to being a certain gender. Randy says, I think sometimes depends on the business area. There are still areas that are dominated by male, even though female are more than welcome, but females are not doing these education jobs. Okay, great. So education and training and making sure that we're preparing both men and women for these opportunities are certainly a problem. And that goes beyond the corporation, right? That hits also into education and societal movements. Imposter syndrome. Great answer there. I think that's something that many people, both men and women, deal with, but certainly it can hold people back. So great. I'm glad that a lot of you have started thinking about this now. Let's discuss a few of them. You can go through these too on your own, but I think it's important to always keep in mind that it's not just the biases. It's not just thinking that women maybe aren't as capable, because I think women everywhere are proving that they are capable. But also, it's hard to say that a woman has one characteristic and a man has other characteristics. So let's think through the various things that might lead to that bias as well. So one of them being limited availability of sex disaggregated data and inconsistent reporting policies. So we might say women never apply for our jobs. We put on there that we're open to different women applying, etc. We say that we are an open employer and that we encourage women, but no women apply. It's important to recognize why women might not be replying and actually even know if women aren't replying. So are you actually tracking how many men and women apply for a particular job, or how many actually get to the interview stage? Tracking all of that information helps you understand where it's stopping, where the barrier actually takes place. And now that barrier might be like that next point, the lack of training and professional development opportunities. Maybe you're asking for a particular degree where in your particular country or region, maybe only 10% of degree holders of that particular degree are women. So that's a conversation that you need to have internally as to whether maybe you need to open up to different degrees and different experiences, or maybe you need to work with the local university to encourage more women to take those particular studies. We also see a lack of gender-sensitive human capital management, so including in the hiring, retention, and promotion processes, such as non-diverse hiring committees and limited use of gender-blind applications. And this can lead to decisions based on biases rather than on qualifications. It can also lead to a failure to recruit widely for applicants, or not embedding a gender lens into the job posting, which can also reduce the number of qualified women applicants. Now we're seeing a lot more AI being used for this and to enhance it, but let's also remember there's a lot of bias in AI as well, because AI is often developed from data developed by men. So we need to make sure we're considering that as well. We also see biases and stereotypes that suggest women do not have the characteristics needed to lead, such as what somebody said, a couple people I think said in the chat. So logical thinking and decisiveness, or create a double bind in which women are expected to be nice or competent, but cannot be both nice and competent. So these are biases that are more subtle than the norms that deliberately exclude women, and they can actually then be a little bit more challenging to overcome. We also see a lack of awareness or skepticism about the business case for gender-balanced leadership. And this can mean that initiatives to advance women may not be the top strategic priority for companies. As allies, men in leadership who have embraced the values of diversity and inclusion can then help to elevate the importance of such initiatives and drive action. We also see limited access to networks and connections can make board and management qualified women maybe less visible to nominating committees and to prominent men who would advocate as allies and champions. And the last few here we see is also a lack of access to role models and mentors and coaches and sponsors. Someone else already mentioned maybe not seeing many mentors or role models. And that can, of course, stunt women's leadership potential as well. So such individuals can play important roles in boosting women's self-confidence, in guiding their professional journeys, and in also championing their advancement. We do see in some instances unsuitable work environments in traditionally male-dominated industries. And also that last one, safety concerns in operational locations and also gender-based violence and harassment, which represents serious deterrence to women's professional advancement. So it's really important to note that achieving a truly gender diverse senior leadership team and organization and optimizing the true value of diversity is about more than sheer numbers and gaining parity and representation. The key is really ensuring that both men and women have equal voice and agency once they're in the leadership role. That's the only way we can get those benefits that we're talking about. And the only way to do that is to really understand what of these barriers are in place and what's stopping that from happening. So not only stopping women, if that's the less represented gender, from advancing, but stopping them from doing well and bringing their different perspective to the table. Just having them there isn't sufficient. And I think Landon's going to go much more into detail into that. So Landon, oh, sorry, I missed one slide here. This is that report Sarah was mentioning. So if you do want to go dig a lot deeper into this topic, I do recommend also reading this recent publication from the IFC on gender responsive climate governance. In particular, this report does look at why we aren't seeing that level we'd like to see. In other words, what barriers are getting in the way. So some examples of what the report finds is lack of knowledge or training on the topic, a low level of climate and governance or climate and gender lens literacy, and low understanding of the impacts on business. And we'll share in the chat this report. Maybe Sarah, you can share that. If not, we can also share it from our side. And that'll help you to continue to look at what barriers you might be facing and overcoming those to make sure that you're achieving that inclusion. And now I'm going to come to Landon to take us through this last unit in this module and really define what we're talking about with gender. Over to you, Landon.
Great. Thanks so much, Tiffany. Before we go to a break, as Tiffany said, let's take an opportunity to go a bit more into the complexity of this topic and focus in on some key terms we may use when discussing gender equality. With that, we want to first look at and pose a question to you. Oh, thank you, Tiffany. What does gender mean to you? So if you can go back to the Menti, there's the code or the QR, or we've put the link in the chat a couple of times. So with that, when you think of gender equality, there's not a right or wrong answer for this. And if you can only think of one or two words, that's no problem. Using this slide, yeah, thank you. Let us know what gender means to you, share a few words that describe the meaning of gender to you. Okay. Identity, fantastic. Okay. Okay, male or female, we'll come to that as well as we discuss. I'll give folks a few more seconds to put in some words. Okay, great. Thanks everyone for the participation. So you all had some great answers, but I do want to make sure that we're all on the same page and we understand the depth of gender, which is not simply sex, which, we saw some folks putting male or female, which, you might be referring to the fact that it isn't simply the sex being male or female. And the purpose of this initial exercise is to make sure that everyone understands that gender is not the same as sex, and that gender can differ in different contexts and societies. This is really important because it's not necessarily different sexes we always need to, that we need when we talk about the value of diversity. It's actually different ways of thinking, different life experiences and lived experiences that folks may bring to the table, and different institutional restrictions or freedoms that differing folks may have. So while we know the term gender is quite difficult to define because it means something different. Oh, thank you. To different people, let's briefly get a better idea of what's included in this very complex term. So We saw a number of answers that were touching on some of these points, but the UN Woman defines gender as the social attributes and opportunities associated with being male and female, and the relationships between women and men and girls and boys, as well as the relations between women and those between men. These attributes, opportunities, and relationships are socially constructed and learned through socialization processes. They are context and time specific and also changeable. Gender determines what is expected, allowed, and valued in a woman or man in a given context. And in most societies, there are differences and inequalities between women and men in responsibilities assigned, activities undertaken, access to and control over resources, as well as decision-making opportunities. Gender is also part of this broader sociocultural context, and some important criteria for sociocultural analysis also, as Tiffany mentioned before, can include class, race, caste, poverty level, ethnic group, and age. As such, gender is not quite as simple as just male or female, but gender can be influenced and defined based on the nature of certain relationships, based on hierarchies, on history, on context, and on institutions or norms. And most importantly, when we're discussing gender equality today, please remember that we're referring to equality of the genders, not simply increasing women on boards. So feel free to explore this and other gender equality terms on the gender equality glossary developed by UN Women, which we also link in the slides. Now, let's dive a bit deeper now. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar or at least heard of the acronym DEI, which stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And we're increasingly seeing DEI managers or even entire teams and organizations that focus on ensuring an organization's DEI performance. So why not just diversity teams or just equity teams? So we'll dig a bit deeper into how these concepts connect and interact, and the importance of having all three of these terms as this full equation. So to start, we'll start on the bottom left with equity. So this is ensuring that there's equitable power distribution amongst people. You can think of equity as providing women and men with the same microphone that amplifies their voices to the same extent so that everyone can hear them both equally, which many might be thinking, well, this is the objective, isn't it? Well, not quite. It's just part of the picture. Let's say, for example, that our objective is equity, equal power distribution, but there are no women in the organization to fairly distribute the power to, and there's no one to actually pick up that microphone. This means we also have to focus on diversity on the bottom right. So diversity is ensuring representation. So the act of inviting the unrepresented gender to join the board or the table enhances that diversity of a board. We can think of diversity as having enough seats at this table for diversity to be represented at the table. Again, differences and different lived experiences are important to organization. So it's not enough to have microphones at the table to make sure everyone can speak at the same volume, but also enough chairs around the table so that there's a diverse group of participants there and willing to speak. But if we just have these two, we can have cultural assimilation take place, where we expect, for example, women to act just like the men, and then we will struggle to keep them on the board, and we won't necessarily be benefiting from that diversity that we aim to achieve through more chairs at the table and the microphones. So it's no good to give someone this microphone if they're not willing or able to speak, or alternatively, to claim by giving someone that power to speak based on their appearance alone is actually achieving diversity, when the objective of diversity is to include diverse ways of thinking and these diverse lived experiences. This is why we also have inclusion. So inclusion refers to behaviors and the practice of making all members of an organization feel welcomed, giving them equal opportunity to connect, belong, and grow, to contribute to the organization, advance their careers, and feel comfortable and confident being their authentic selves. So to bring it all together, we can say that diversity is being invited to the boardroom, equity is then having the empowerment to speak at the board meeting, and inclusion is being listened to within that board meeting. But of course, this goes much further than the boardroom and should be considered organization-wide at all levels, not just in the boardroom. The end goal is then equality, which depends on all three circles coming together: diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can have diversity without equity or inclusion, and it will not be sustained. Equally, we can have equity without diversity, but we won't make any progress. So when we talk about equity today and in the next session, especially when we talk about the benefits it brings, remember that we're not simply looking for an equal number of men and women on boards or in organizations. What we really want is these three things: diversity, equity, and inclusion. In the handout, you can also find a more detailed version of this diagram, but for now, hopefully this is a good pause, give you a 5-minute break for a quick tea or stretch. And when the music ends for the reflection break, please come back and we'll continue on with the session.
It seems the music doesn't want to start, but everyone go ahead and take your break. And I'm sure this will start. There we go. Enjoy your break. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had time to do a quick stretch. Maybe grab yourself a tea or a coffee for the last hour. I guess we have nearly quarter of an hour left now. And that brings us to our second unit. So we're doing two modules today. This is our second one, so we're halfway there for sure. And this is our align module. And remember, alignment, think of the railroad tracks that keep you on track moving forward. So what do you use? What tools can you start using to start aligning your practices with those objectives we've set? And now, as I said, we're going to look at various levels here. We're going to look at the global level, the local level, and what our peers are doing. And we're going to start today with the global level, the global baseline, and where to get started with. And for that, we're going to talk about the UN Women's Empowerment Principles and how you can make use of those principles to kind of set those railroad tracks and keep you moving in the right direction. Now, to kick us off, I'm going to launch a poll here just to get an idea from everyone whether your organization is a signatory of the UN Women's Empowerment Principles. It'll help us understand how many of you are already quite familiar with this topic. So you have three options: yes, no, or I don't know. And I don't know is a perfectly valid option if you're not aware whether or not your company has signed up to the UN Women Empowerment Principles. You can learn more about it today, and then hopefully you can look into it afterwards. Take a moment, look into whether or not your organization is a member. And maybe Anna, when you're explaining the WEPs, maybe share with people how they can find out if their company is a member as well. So we have 40% of you that filled it in. So I'm going to wait. I think maybe a few people are coming back from break. So let's give everyone a chance to answer this. And I'll give you maybe 30 more seconds. Not many of you are saying no so far, so that's fantastic. Thanks, Anna. We see she just linked, Anna linked in the chat to the list of companies. So for those of you who picked, I don't know, maybe while we're waiting for the rest of our participants to fill this in, you can take a look and see if you are. And if not, you'll learn a bit more today about how you can start getting involved. Okay, I'm going to end it there. We have more than half of you. Okay, Anna, you have this information now. Yes is doing well. So already 36%. Let's keep in mind we have a number of Euronext employees with us today as well. 56% don't know. So hopefully they'll make use of that link there. And only 9% said no. So good to know. I'm going to stop sharing that. And before Anna discusses the UN WEPs, let's just watch a very quick video just to be introduced to them.
Think about the impact of a signature. Think about the magnitude of a global movement. Think about the difference you can make and the power of transformative change. By signing the Women's Empowerment Principles, you can galvanize your shareholders and stakeholders to drive change in the workplace, marketplace, and community through a framework of 7 principles. Brought to you by UN Women and UN Global Compact, the Women's Empowerment Principles are a roadmap for business sustainability, innovation, and productivity. Businesses by the thousands and in every sector are becoming part of this world-changing movement to advance gender equality. Businesses that become models for attracting talent, entering new markets, serving their communities, and measurably improving the bottom line. Because gender equality means better business. Don't miss this moment to make a lasting impact on your employees, suppliers, customers, and investors. Join leading companies already on the journey to greater sustainability and growth. Commit to the Women's Empowerment Principles and make today your organization's signature moment.
Great. I'm starting to think we need to add some motivational music to our first module too, because I think that just got more people motivated than the first module. Anna, I'm going to pass to you just so everyone remembers. Anna is head of the Women Empowerment Principles Secretariat, and she's here to share with us a little bit more about them. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And this session today is so timely. Before I go into walking you through the women's empowerment principles, I just wanted to emphasize that the upcoming year, 2025, is a milestone for us. 2025 represents 30 years since we adopted the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. We, meaning all member states in the world, by consensus, agreed on this roadmap. And that also is the roadmap that have informed the Sustainable Development Goals and SDG 5 specifically on gender equality. So it is a very, very important year where governments across the world will be reviewing what they have done, what that is the status of gender equality in the world, and more importantly, what's next. We saw and we heard from Tiffany earlier that it will take up to 300 years for gender equality to be achieved. So this is a really important moment for us in 2025 to celebrate the successes, but also look at how do we reduce this 300 years. And the Women's Empowerment Principles is the platform for the private sector to really distill down what exactly does it mean. And this week, we have actually reached 10,000 companies across the world, in every country, UN member state. So we're very happy that this community is growing and that we get commitment from all over the world. So there are 7 principles, and we've heard a little bit about all of them already, but I'll walk you through a little bit of the framework itself. It has some major pillars with a high-level corporate leadership. It is very, very important that the CEO and the executive team is on board on this. They are the ultimate responsible for driving a sustainable business. And without this high-level corporate leadership, those gender equality will not be fully integrated into the business strategy and operations as it has to be to really have an impact on gender equality and women's empowerment. We have principle 2, 3, and 4 that focus on the workplace. Just to mention that these principles were launched in 2010, where the workplace was the main focus. So principle 5 has evolved to be a very, very important principle, but we have a lot of things packed in there. It is about the entire supply chain. It is about making a difference in the broader ecosystem in the industry and also in marketing practices. It's key to have community initiatives and advocacy, not only as philanthropic and support in the community, but also to hear what women and girls need and how you can support them and how you can actually bring them in either as talent or as suppliers or other stakeholders in your business endeavors. Measuring and reporting is the final pillar. Very, very key. And with the ESG, CSRD, and other requirements that are coming your way, this is becoming increasingly important. But let me go through the journey briefly. The WEPs, it's not only about making the commitment, even though the commitment is very important. A public commitment fosters accountability. A public commitment also, because signing the WEPs requires the CEO to make this commitment. So to make that public, both internally and externally, and I wonder among you who did not know whether your company is a signatory. For sure, we know that Euronext signed the Women's Empowerment Principles in 2023, And I hope that you are driving this internally, this commitment, and also with your market participants. So the link that I provided will give you some more insights to that. But after the signing and making this a public announcement, it's very important to activate the internal stakeholders to make sure that they are informed and involved, and more importantly, consulted. Because true gender equality comes from when everybody is on board, it becomes an organization, all of organization effort and priority. So this activate part of the WEP's journey is very, very important. This is also how then you can link it to the engaging part of the journey, where you start engaging, as Euronext has been doing through this session today, with some of the market participants, but also through engaging suppliers, business partners, and others that play a role in advancing gender equality. And this is, we've seen a lot of progress on this in terms of engaging in the supply chain. We have banks, we have manufacturers, we have other type of companies that are really, truly engaging in the supply chain here. And we have taken a dual approach to this supply chain work, engaging with women-owned business, but also to check and see, does your values of gender equality also align with that of your suppliers and business partners? And we see increasingly that business partners are encouraging their partners, their suppliers, to also take a stand and make a commitment to the women's empowerment principles. Because the more alignment, the less risk for the company in being associated with companies that might have no commitment, or even human rights abuses or other form of inequalities and bias. So this is very important, both for building that ecosystem, but also to really, truly making sure that you are seeking opportunities with the right partners, but also eliminating risks. Sustaining is not necessarily one step by another. You can activate and then go straight to sustain, but collecting data, and I think we have heard about that earlier, how important it is to track progress. And I've seen companies that are doing a lot of fabulous things, but are not necessarily tracking it. So how can you then, if you're not tracking your activities, how can you say that it has an impact, particularly on the company itself, but also it doesn't necessarily sustain the activities that you're doing. You have no grounding to say we need to continue this work. So sustaining is very, very important. Reporting is also becoming increasingly important, as I mentioned, with the ESG work and the CSRD, particularly in Europe, but also across the world. We've seen other governments that are now replicating the EU reporting requirements in other parts of the world. And this is also because of the global supply chains. We do encourage our web signatories to report on the WEP's website to make that the progress visible to everyone. So how do you become a web signatory? The eligibility criteria is that you are a legally registered company, any size, any sector, any country, any type of ownership. We do also encourage chambers of commerce and industry association to join, because you have also a very important role to play in terms of bringing your members on board. And as I mentioned, the real true ecosystem that we'd like to see. And you have also here the link that is also containing the step-by-step. It has some frequently asked questions. But I'd like to mention that being a web signatory, we've heard earlier how to find the women and how to and recruit, and we have a lot of tools. We have over 300 tools that can help you on this journey. We have templates for action plans. We have a recommendation, but we also here as UN Women. But bottom line is, if something doesn't work, It is about going outside the box, thinking a little bit different. And we've seen with many companies that they try different things. Just to mention a airline in Latin America that wanted to have parity on pilots, and they couldn't find the women pilots because they hadn't necessarily the requirements from the pilot training. So they bought some simulators and trained women to become pilots. So it's not, there's no excuse anymore. We don't want this journey to be 300 years. And we are here to help, both from UNSSE and UN Women. Just reach out to us and we are here to help. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Anna. Very helpful. And I like that. There's no excuse now. So thinking outside the box is sometimes necessary. And I think UN Women has a lot of case studies of that too. So that's something we'll talk a little bit more next time. But if anyone who's searching for something should go look at UN Women's website. And you can already find a number of resources that are available even to non-members. Just a flag for those who are WEP signatories, which many of you we now know are. Something that was mentioned at the beginning, Sarah was mentioning that at IFC, they're currently going through their EDGE certification. Now, if you are a WEB signatory already and you'd like to take it a step further, this is some way that you can move forward to really certify what you're doing. EDGE provides a certifying service so that they can help you to take your practices a little further and provide that communication tool that you might need. So we'll leave that slide with you so that everybody can review that in their own time. But with that, I wanted to come back to from the kind of global practices and global look to local. And I'm going to pass over to my colleague Landon again, who's going to take us through this unit and do a little exercise with you. So over to you, Landon.
Great. Thank you again, Tiffany. So now that we've had a look at some of these global initiatives, let's take a look at what should be considered based on your location. One of the key factors that should be considered based on where your company is listed, as well as where your main operations are, is regulation. So let's briefly discuss what we're seeing from a regulatory perspective. So here on this slide, we can see a number of markets where there's some kind of gender quota or requirement set for listed companies. This is from a past report that we produced. On the right side, you can see the current status of gender diversity on the boards of companies in these markets, as well as the percentage of female board chairs and CEOs. Now, one interesting question we often get asked is whether or not quotas or mandatory requirements work and if this should be implemented in a country. This is a very hotly debated topic, and if you'd like to dig a bit deeper into this topic, you can review some extra slides included in the handout today. There's also some reports on our website, and this provides some insight from a recent study featured by the UNPRI about gender-based quota policies. But as we've seen in the data we discussed today, sometimes this works and sometimes this doesn't work. Why is that? Well, it's not entirely the reason. A portion of that is because it really depends on how the company implements these quotas, what actions are taken by the company, and how such a rule or regulation might be interpreted. So with that, we'll come to the exercise that Tiffany mentioned, and we're going to go down to the company level to see what we mean by how a company implements it and do this exercise together. So with that, we come to the exercise where we're going to discuss two hypothetical companies. Let's call one company Owl Inc., and we'll call the other company Peacock Inc., or Peacock PLC. These are entirely made up fictional companies, but the discussion we have around them on their decision-making processes is based on research from real companies. Now, both of these companies have only 10% women on their boards and in executive leadership, but both have parity of 50% women and men in operational level positions. So it's clear we see that women aren't getting into the higher positions or those leadership positions. The companies also have another thing in common. They both just had a change in leadership and have new CEOs joining And let's say that both CEOs are expecting new regulation to come in, so they're preparing for a mandatory rule related to gender equality. The new CEO at both companies is passionate about gender equality, and they want to achieve gender equality at the top of the companies in their board and leadership positions, so they can be included in a gender equality index, which will give them more exposure to investors that value gender parity. Each company, however, took a different approach towards their goals of gender equality, and therefore they had differing results. So with that, we'll discuss the two approaches and what they do, and we'll first look at Peacock PLC. So with Peacock PLC, they have the new CEO as mentioned, and they set a target of 40% women in leadership positions in 2 years from now. To do this, they make an announcement. As mentioned, the woman CEO herself, she also shares her experience in this announcement. And to help reach this 40%, they also set a hiring freeze of any men until the target is reached, unless approved by the CEO for extenuating circumstances. Now, some employees are feeling, excited, empowered, but some, including some women, are scared potentially of the more pressure to move up or out with this change. And some men have some job security concerns of what this new target means for them and their careers. So overall, the sentiment in the org might be a bit excited, but also mixed with some adequate dose of fear. Now, let's look on the other side what Owl Incorporated does. So, also as a new CEO, they are committed to gender equality in leadership positions, but instead of the 40% target and a hiring freeze, this CEO decides to join the 30% club. And if you don't know the 30% club, it calls on its members to commit at least 30% of female representation on their boards and executive leadership teams, because as Tiffany mentioned earlier in our workshop, this is the critical mass at which minority voices become heard. So with this, they want to, surpass the 30%. So it's almost a bottom target to reach. Now they want to achieve and surpass this 30%, but the CEO is also not sure of the root cause. So they set up an internal task force to find out what the root causes are and may be in the organization. At the same time, the CEO also initiates a reverse mentorship program. As we mentioned, 50% of this workforce is women. So why aren't leadership learning from them and hearing their experiences already? So, this can allow leadership to benefit from some more diverse perspective, etc. Now, with that, I'd like to turn it over to you. Each company has some different strategies, but we'd like your view and your thoughts on what you think are the most effective versus the least effective. If you'd like to rank those activities that the two companies took, and we'll give you a minute to rank them.
And I see somebody already said in the chat, Owlink. So someone likes everything Owlink did already. But maybe if you want to also share through the Menti. Oh, we want to share the link. Sorry, that's our bad. We'll get that link in there. But you can also use that QR code if you want in the meantime. Oh, I think you're getting that right, Landon. Cool. So a few of you are accessing it. I see that the first one we see here is creating a gender equality task force. That one's winning out so far. And the one doing the least is initiating a hiring freeze of the overrepresented gender. Great. I always find it interesting how the two percentages do, the 30% club versus the 40% as a target. I'll give everyone a little bit more time to fill it in before I spoil anything. That gender equality task force is staying strong at the top though. I will say that that's one of my favorites as well. I think one of the things we've come back to time and time again is barriers, root causes, reasoning, understanding, data, that sort of thing. So creating a gender equality task force really does help us to understand what are those barriers, what's happening, what's going wrong. How can a company have 50% women in its workforce and only 10% in the leadership? Where is that broken rung in the ladder? We have to find it in order to replace it. So I think that's really helpful. So we did also see from that same company indicating or initiating a reverse mentorship program. That one's not doing so well. You're not all loving that one as much. But when I first mentioned the 40% and 30%, 30% was higher. It was that second, and they've reversed since. Maybe me bringing it up altered that a little bit. But this is actually something we commonly see. So I think it's very easy to often think, okay, well, that's a better target. 40% is higher. Why aren't we striving for 40%? I think the important thing to remember is how those two targets were set. So I would reverse them, actually. I think that joining the 30% club, even though the percentage is lower, that's because that's our bottom line. We're saying we have to get at least to 30% because once we have 30% or 1/3, more or less, that's when voices are heard. And that's when we start to feel included, and that it's the whole DEI that Landon was talking about earlier, that starts to happen. So sometimes the percentage might be lower, but the intent behind it and what comes with it is actually much stronger. So it's going to have more impact. Setting a target of 40% means that's our top target. That's the highest we want to go. And, that's sufficient. Whereas if we want to make sure we're staying within 30% of either gender, that means we can go up to 70% women, right? Because then we still have 30% men there. So why limit it at 40%? The other sharing experience of role models at the top. Now, I think that's something really great that the Peacock PLC did. It was a woman CEO. She's sharing how she got there. However, that is a one-way communication. She still doesn't know why nobody else has made it to that level. How come she made it and nobody else is managing to make it? I see one person say, why not 50%, which is a great question. That's where the 30% club works because it's a minimum. So we can always go up further, and we should always be striving to move and move back and forth, right? We don't have to stay stagnant at, it's not, we want to keep it at 40%, for example, forever, just as we're seeing the data kind of changing a little bit. So yeah, good reactions. Landon, you cool if I send back to you now? I'm going to get the slides going again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tiffany. So the next thing we'll look at is what the outcome of prioritizing the targets looked like. So we'll look back at, one second, we'll look back at Peacock PLC and some of the impacts that may result from taking an approach and prioritizing the targets. So what we saw was maybe some immediate progress after setting sorry, got my slides mixed up. What we saw was some immediate progress after setting this quota, but Peacock PLC didn't identify these underlying issues that may be the root cause, which can result in promoting women, but also demotivating some men in the organization, as men may feel like they have less security and opportunity to grow. It could also result, or an impact could be filling positions could take longer and sometimes not necessarily be the right candidate. And they could have to use some external hiring to fill positions, which could also hurt the organization morale. And a result of this could be a culture change in the organization with higher turnover, potentially less innovation and risks taken. So the CEO has great intentions, but without being aware of what the root cause of gender equality is in their organization, they can't necessarily effectively address the issue. Now, we'll look at Owl Incorporated. So what we see is, a different approach entirely by the CEO. With this, they had to invest a bit more upfront, but very soon they'll likely see a return on that investment. Whereas we can see that Peacock PLC will probably have to pay for not making the investment up front. So Owl Incorporated took a more holistic approach and realized that if they want to benefit from the changes in their organization's leadership, then they have to be accepted by the whole organization. And they also need to tackle specific issues within the organization that cause the lack of diversity to begin. Now, by creating a task force as well as implementing this reverse mentorship program, Owl Incorporated was able to identify not only the specific barriers that can come from inflexible working arrangements, biased benefits, or a lack of support for certain genders to be able to succeed, but they were also able to change the leadership culture through the mentorship program, which opened their eyes to the value of diversity in decision-making processes. As a result, the company actually saw increased increased innovation, since diversity leads to more pushback of ideas, but also pushed the leaders to think of new and innovative solutions, since they ended up saving resources associated with external hires. They could also continue to train and educate staff members to further enhance the culture within the organization that they were looking for, which is something rightfully that a number of folks have brought up, of the importance of education and adequate training. Now, we have a slide here on corporate culture, but we'll discuss this next time because we still want enough time for our guest speaker. So with that, we'll quickly move along so that and skip this slide and move on, I believe, back to Anna, but correct me if I'm wrong, Tiffany.
Yes, that's correct. Anna, we still have you here?
I am here indeed. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Anna. And sorry, we pushed a little bit on that exercise, so if you can just keep it to a couple minutes, then we'll make sure we have enough time for Heather at the end.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thanks for this opportunity to come back. I just wanted to give a few examples, and the airline, I think there are a few airlines in Latin America that are working on this, but I can share with the details through email. But I think it's important to really see that there are very, very committed web signatories that are working on different things and where they see that they have the biggest gap. So we do have a specific tool that we call the WEPS Gender Gap Analysis tool that can help you to really understand where your gaps are. It's a free tool and data is only available to yourself. But this is how some companies have come to understand where are their biggest gaps and where do they need to focus on. So we have, for example, a bank in Sweden that focused on the gender pay gap. That was also because the legislation in Sweden was very strong and required that reporting on the gender pay gap from all companies. It started off as a kind of ad hoc exercise every time the government required this data, but then they understood that to be able to make it a more ongoing effort, that would also help and not bring in so much efforts every time it was time to report. So, from this example, I'd like to recommend that you see tracking and reporting as an ongoing effort, or not something only when it's required by law or by other kind of frameworks once a year, but to make it a continuous process. The bank in Spain was also very, very interesting, and it was also taking a little bit the out of the box perspective, where they saw that the men were racing to the ranks and not the women. And that is also taking into consideration the local context and the culture in where a lot of employees are working late at night. And basically they said to leveling the playing field between women and men, and those with responsibilities to get home and pick up the children after school and daycare, etc. They just said, let's close the building at 7 p.m. switch off the lights, lock the door, and nobody can sit at long hours. So it is about finding what is taking the organizational culture into consideration and to try to identify what the specific challenges are. But I know we have short of time, so I just encourage you to really go to some of our tools that we have. We have a lot of different, as I mentioned earlier, 300 resources for you. But I recommend for those that are maybe a little bit more advanced on the workplace issues. I already mentioned the WEPS gender gap analysis tool, which is basically helping you to establish the baseline. But we have also developed specific tools for you. For those that are struggling and reaching the women, we have a gender responsive recruitment checklist. This is really about helping you to think differently in terms of how the vacancy announcement is being formulated, but also where the channels that you're using to distribute it. That really matters on whether you will get traction to your vacancy announcement from women. The other tool is the gender responsive procurement assessment tool, which we launched last year. It has 31 questions and it really go into depth on what you can do to improve gender equality in your supply chain. And finally, we have also the gender action plan module that helps you to put together an action plan based on the WEPS gender gap analysis tool. It also helps to give ideas for how to consult and how to make sure that it's a whole of organization effort and priority to advance gender equality.
Great. Thanks so much, Anna, for putting everyone through that so quickly. We appreciate it. And just so everyone knows, you have these links in the slides as well. So if you have any follow-up questions, just let us know and we can put you in touch with the team that can help you out even further. And without any more delay, I'd love to pass to our guest speaker today, Heather Larson, who, as I mentioned at the very beginning, is Director of Equality Research at Equileap, who's worked very closely with Euronext to develop their indices. Heather, I think you should be able to share your screen, but I'm going to stop sharing mine here so that you can share your screen. And we'd love to hear more about Equileap and why this data is so important after all. So over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Tiffany, and everyone who's presented already so far. I'm really happy to be here today. Can everyone see my screen?
We do see it, but we see it in presenter.
It's the wrong one. Yeah, there we go.
Perfect. We see it now.
Thank you. So I lead the research team at Equileap, and we're an ESG data provider, and our specialty is gender. So we're a data provider with a mission to close the gender, the equality gap, but specifically we work in the equality, gender equality sector. And essentially what we want to do is enable responsible investors to make better decisions on gender equality and with their investments. So we evaluate 5,800 publicly listed companies in 45 different countries. So that's across developed and emerging markets. And we cover 21 different gender equality indicators with 48 submetrics. And we also have 10 years of historical data on these indicators. As an aside, we're also looking into a more intersectional lens of equality. So looking at S&P 500 and diversity representation broken down by race and gender. So that's a new angle that we're looking at. But with all of this data, so with the 5,800 companies, with the 21 indicators, and the data that we give investors, we're allowing them to do a number of different things. So one of them is ESG integration, so incorporating gender into investment processes, portfolio analysis, so managing a portfolio's gender footprint. We're looking at indices, so I think I'll talk a bit more about that with Euronext on Monday. So developing gender-themed indices, and then also shareholder engagement, so increasing in corporate accountability and controversy screenings, so managing reputational risks. Our research process is quite extensive and really focused on quality assurance. So we do desk research using publicly available information. So all of our evaluations are based on information that companies have published themselves in the last 2 years. There's a strict peer review and quality assurance process. So this is really, we focus a lot on harmonization of data, because across the global landscape, different sectors, different countries, there's a million different ways to report on some of these, on most of these metrics. And so our team has years of experience finding out how to compare apples to apples, how to make sure that we're giving companies fair valuations that investors can then use to make fair assessments. And we're also engaging with companies. So that's an important part to ensure accuracy of the data, but also to make sure that companies know what we're evaluating them on and can improve year on year. So to look at the scorecard, we're really going beyond just what is the representation of women at any given level. We worked, basically we've developed this scorecard using in part inspiration from the UN Women's Empowerment Principles. You'll be able to see or recognize a lot of the workplace and supply chain metrics that they have there, as well as that critical piece of measurement and reporting, so that transparency aspect. We have 4 different categories here, and they're each weighted differently as well. So we're looking at gender balance and leadership in the workforce at all different levels of the company. And we would define gender balance as 40 to 60% women. So we have different scoring levels where a company receives full points for having 40 to 60% women, lower points for having different buckets in terms of percentages there. For category B, we're looking at equal compensation and work-life balance. So this is living wage commitments, transparency and performance on the gender pay gap, parental leave policies, both from companies and from country legislation, and flexible work options. For category C, we're looking at policies that promote gender equality. So these contribute to an equal and safe workplace for all. Some notable ones are an anti-sexual harassment policy or a supplier diversity policy that includes women-owned businesses. And finally, we're looking at commitment and accountability. So being a signatory to the UN Women's Empowerment Principles or having undergone a gender audit, for example, EDGE, which was mentioned earlier today. We also look at controversies. So this could be cases against a company on gender discrimination, sexual harassment. So this kind of balances out the company transparency with what's actually going on. How is this playing out? And that can help screen for reputational risks or risks in general for investors. So our scorecard is really biased towards transparency. So companies need to be publishing this information for us to take them account in our evaluation. And that's really to encourage accountability, to reiterate that we can't manage what we're not measuring. And in our scorecard, so that's the baseline, is that all of these metrics need to be published, but then there's a higher rate to the metrics that are actually on the performance. So that's why we have weighted categories, weighted metrics that contribute to the overall company score. So there's a higher weight for things like having 40 to 60% women at each level, or what's the representation of women each level, has the company closed the pay gap, that sort of thing. Lower weight for metrics that are more transparency. Have they published this policy? So to look a bit, what does this look like? How does this all come together? Is we look at all of these different metrics. So there's 21 indicators that we look at. 19 of them are actually scored and contribute to the company's overall gender equality score out of 100%. Then we'll assign, so investors can either they can get our data sets with all of the values for each separate indicator, and also the overall score for the company, score for criteria, score for categories, and they can use that. They can cut it in different ways, but one way that we look at it is the company's overall gender equality score, and then we also do a ranking every year. So here I just have a snapshot of the top 10 companies at Equileap in our 2024 report, which is based on our 2023 data set. Here we can see this is the top 10 in developed markets, so across the world. And what you see is there's really a mix of sectors. So this is something that can be achieved. These top scores can be achieved whether you're in industrial, financial, real estate, etc. But what we do see is 9 out of 10 of these companies are all based in countries where there's strong legislation, either on transparency, so that's countries where it's mandatory to publish a gender pay gap, or something like legislation on performance. So for example, in France needing 40% women on boards, that sort of thing. In the US, there's only one company that's made it to the top 10, and we see a lot of legislation there. So we know that this company is really investing themselves in gender equality. So we can see, we can just looking at the scores, these are all relative. So these are the top 10 companies, but none of them has 100% score. So that shows there's still a ways to go. And we can really dig into that data. But we see the top company, Transurban, an Australian industrials company. It's a roadworks company. Their top score is 80%. So that's the highest one we've seen. And for Transurban, what we see gender balance at all levels of the company. So that's full points for category A, which is the highest weighted category. We also see good parental leave, good flexible work policies, transparency on the gender pay gap, although they haven't closed it, living wage policy, and all of the policies that we're looking for to contribute to an equal workplace. They're not a UNWEPS signatory, but they do have a gender audit. So this company is one that's transparent in a lot of places, and they're performing in key areas. If we look at the number 10 company, International Flavors and Fragrances in the US, they haven't reached gender balance at any of the levels that we're looking at, not full gender balance. But they have closed the gender pay gap, which is an important one. They have good parentally flexible work policies, all 8 of the policies that we're looking for to contribute to gender equality, UNWEP signatory, and a global gender audit. So you can see that there's different ways to look at a company, and we're taking many things into consideration. I think we're almost out of time, so I'll just leave you with this visual. You can find it in our report. All of our reports are published online, and I think this shows the dark green are criteria where companies are doing well, red where they're not doing so well. So you can see kind of different trends based on country here. But there's lots of different ways to cut our data and for investors to look at companies and countries in a really holistic way. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Heather. And so sorry to rush you at the end. We just want to make sure
That's
everybody gets out in time. I'm going to come back to our slide deck here. And just to let everyone know, we're going to share Heather's slides as well on our website, so you can review those in your own time. And if you have any questions, let us know, and we'll put you in contact with Equileap so that they can answer any of your questions. Maybe you want to work with them more closely as well. Now, I also shared, I'm not going to have time to go back to the Menti, but I also shared the link again of the Menti. If you can go back to that and let us know now how comfortable you are with those 3 areas of your knowledge, discussing with others, and taking action. We'd love to hear from you on that front. Now, just as a reminder, if you do come back to us well, it says Wednesday here. I think, is it a Monday next week? Sorry, I've forgotten already when our session is. Landon, can you look it up and remind us when our next session was? It's a Monday. Thanks, Cleo. So next Monday. Normally we do them Monday and Wednesday, but we did it a bit opposite because it's Sustainability Week for Euronext. So we're going to see you all on Monday, not Wednesday, next week, and then we'll share with you how to get your certificate. Really well done, everyone. We've had a lot of really good interaction, so we very much appreciate that, and hopefully you got a lot from this too. Just to let you know, you can access all of our contact details at the end of the slides as well. And we wanted to thank Heather for taking the time of joining us today for this session and sharing that insight, which is so helpful for everyone and really reinforces everything we were talking about earlier today. Thanks so much to Anna too for joining us and adding her perspective, which is super helpful. We have Anna with us again next time. And of course, thank you to all of our official supporters. These are stock exchanges as well as other organizations that provide a financial contribution to make all of the SSE's work possible and free of charge. And thanks to Euronext. Now, I saw there was a question somewhere in there in the chat, but I think I might have lost it right now. So if you do have any questions, you can email them to us, or you can hold them for Monday, and we'll answer those questions from you on Monday. Someone's asked where to access the PowerPoint presentation. You can get it off of our website. We have today's up now, and we'll put up before Monday the next session's slide deck too. So before you log in, you can check out the same website. And I'll just share with you, here you go, the website you can use. It's also in your email from Zoom too, so you should be able to find that pretty easily. Great. So I think that's it. That ding just said, time's up, Tiffany. You need to let everyone go. So thanks, everyone. You've all been really great participants. We've loved hearing from you. Think about what you want to know for the next one, and we'll continue this conversation. So we'll see you all on Monday. Enjoy the rest of the Euronext Sustainability week or 2 weeks. I'm not sure how many days it is, and we'll see you next week. Take care, and thanks to all of our speakers today.